right, it is now 5 o'clock, and we'll bring the, open the committee meeting, municipal facilities. The first order of business is the approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All right, the minutes are approved, and it brings us to our second order of business, which is the quarter deck lease agreement, and I welcome Mackenzie and Ken to the table, and we'll turn it over to Tim. Take her away.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to have Mackenzie and Ken here so they can talk about, or Mackenzie can introduce herself and talk about her plans. But I'll just start off. This is new to this committee, but about 4 months ago, Ken had approached us, the council, about extending his lease and then potentially assigning it to a new owner. And so that new owner will be Mackenzie Myers, and she's worked at the quarter deck. She's managed the quarter deck for a long time. But rather than extending the lease agreement with Ken and then assigning it, we talked about just entering into a new lease, a brand new lease with Mackenzie, and terminating the lease with Ken. And that way, you know, Mackenzie will be familiar with the terms as we negotiate it, and we can move forward with her. So we met with the Economic Development Committee a few months ago, and we talked about some terms. And so what we would be proposing is to do a new extension with Mackenzie for a 5-year term with an additional option for 5 years. And that would be contingent on meeting the requirements of the lease, obviously the rent, but then there's some performance standards and other things in there. What we're proposing on the rent is to keep it the same formula. It increases every year by the CPI. It started at $300 a month, and now it's up to $381. So that's about 4.5 years later. And then we'll update the map on the lease agreement. But really, what we're looking at, and I had included a copy of Ken's lease, is essentially an identical lease agreement with the new owner, except just updating the term, the rent, the map, but really basically just handing over what's been working to a new owner. And our staff, Michael and I and Scott, we met with Mackenzie and her dad, and she presented us with a business plan and gave us that information that I think made us feel confident that she's capable of taking this over and running it comparable to how it's been. So that's kind of where we're at. So I don't know if the committee wants to talk to me, wants to talk to Ken, wants to talk to Mackenzie or Michael, or
I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
So on the updating the map, can you give me a little more clarification on that?
Yeah, so essentially we just the map in Ken's draft, or in Ken's lease, just shows the footprint of the building and the deck. So we would create a new map to define the outline of where everything is. In the original lease, so what we had granted Ken authorization to use this outdoor area, and at first I believe it was just grass. But then because he is serving alcohol and there's people out here, there's rules about that. So essentially they had to cordon that area off. So we would keep the rent amount the same, but confirm with our map the actual area that's being leased.
Okay. That's all I had.
Yep. Yeah, just a couple of things that I want to sort of premise this question with. I'm really glad you guys are there. I really like the quarter deck. I think it brings a lot to the city. And, you know, I think it's become a very well-established sort of landmark to a degree in our city. I mean, talk about the quarterback. Everybody knows where that is. But I got a phone call last night from somebody who's also a big supporter of the quarter deck, wanting to understand how that amount was arrived at, because it doesn't strike this person as fair market value for that land. And, you know, I know there are a lot of things coming in terms of the marina redevelopment. How much did that factor in to what that amount is gonna be? And just how did you start at 300 and then go up by I understand a CPI increase, but, you know, get a better sense of understanding where that number came from and why.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I mean, there was the basis for that rent was we've recently done an amendment with CSR, and we had gotten an appraisal for the square footage that they have. And so we used the same formula. CSR is the boat repair yard on the marina. Yeah. So right there. So essentially, CSR is paying the exact same amount of rent per square foot. So that was the formula. We had an appraisal, said this is how much per square foot. We took their area, times it by that, it was 300. So that was the formula. And then, Michael, I don't know if you wanted to talk about public benefit.
Well, appreciate that. So when Ken started, I mean, this was a huge capital investment by Ken Rogers into this process, into this facility. And really, it was one of the first times we could actually see what was possible on the marina floor. So we felt that we wanted to help him in any way we could be successful. So essentially what we did was we kept the rent at a relatively minimal level based on what Tim was describing for the formula, and feel that everything the quarter deck has brought to the city is public value. And we didn't want to put them in a position of, you know, kind of scraping by to see if they could make it. We wanted to see a clear demonstration of success, which is Ken, to his credit, and Mackenzie and others made that happen. So we think just that as an example of what's possible was worth the investment by the city, as well as trying to keep it at current fair market value, which one might say is significantly understated.
Yeah, just to what extent did the seasonal shifts come into play? Because, I mean, like, even tonight, the sun's starting to set early, and they have music down there tonight, but the sun may be down by 7 o'clock when the music's supposed to end, and generally, you know, during the summer, it stays there a lot later. Did that factor in?
Well, I think if you average the rent across a year, you'd still have pretty favorable terms.
Okay. Just one other thing to note, and then I guess, Ken, you can add on. It's sort of like a trailer park lease in a way, because essentially what we're leasing is the footprint, and Ken paid for the building, did all the capital construction costs on that. So if the city owned the building, you know, maybe we could have an argument for a higher rate, but that actual building is owned by the quarter deck, and you know, when their lease ends, they're certainly entitled to take it with them.
And just by way of background, first of all, thank you for having us here today, because I know you got a lot of other stuff you need to work on. The success that we've had at the quarter deck has been not mine. It's been a function of everybody that's worked on this, to include the marina staff and the city staff up here. But the reputation that we're able to enjoy is largely a function of Mackenzie's effort. She's the manager, she hires people, she does the scheduling, she does most of the ordering. And so I just want to reassure you that the continuity around the quality of the operation is best preserved with her, better than anybody that I could, you know, go to the market for. And she's worked there for a long time. She knows the people really well. She understands that it's not just it's not a business in the sense of we're just there to make a buck. We want to provide an opportunity for people to enjoy that waterfront area, and she gets it. I'd have to try to explain that to somebody else. And because of her efforts, we have ridiculously high social media ratings. So just know that that transition piece should be pretty smooth, or at least that would be my hope. Back to the original lease discussions that we had in the beginning, recall that nobody was paying anything for that property. So it was generating exactly zero revenue. So the model that we began to discuss was one that was very much like moorage, very much like moorage. I would bring my boat, that would just happen to be a building, and put it on a space that the city owns instead of in the water on this piece of unutilized space, and pay revenue or pay rent as that sort of function. And it was also developed in a partnership with the city because at the time, and if you look at the lease, there are provisions in there to actually move that building, because when we began to talk about this, we didn't know what kind of progress would be made on other economic development. If this thing was going to get in the way, everybody acknowledged that it needed to not be in the way of that. And so there's a lot of little nuancy things that go into how those numbers were arrived at, some of which are not tangible in a spreadsheet sense, but more in an economic development and sort of partnership sense. And the other piece is it's really difficult to find a comp for this. So when somebody talks to me about market value on that space, it's like, well, it's kind of what you make it, because to go and find that small of a commercial building in a place where the building sits on land that the owner of the building doesn't own, that's just a very unusual circumstance. And so I would be very curious to see what a comp would be. Now, as Tim mentioned, if the city owned the building, then we're back to mainstream stuff, and there'd be a different discussion about all that. But when I try to explain to people about how that arrangement came together was first a partnership to try to demonstrate some economic development, and the other, it's just very, very similar to the notion of a moorage and bringing your boat into the marina, or brought a little building into the grass, and that seems to answer most of the questions. And I'm always happy to talk to people. If you run into a constituent that has questions and you're uncertain about the history or something, I'm happy to talk with them about that.
Well, I think next steps is you bring the full contract to council for McKinsey, and then we approve it and move it forward. So I'd just like to say that being on the council long enough to have worked through all of the challenges that Ken faced and, spearheaded this adventure was incredible at the time, and it has created an incredible place down on the waterfront that we could only imagine about. And so, McKinsey, I'm glad that you're taking it over and that we were able to get to an agreement that was suitable for everybody. I know even when we were talking about renewing the contract, there was some concerns that we couldn't keep it affordable and in the price range for you to take it over. So I'm glad that we got to that, and I'm excited that we're moving forward. So, and an awesome adventure in your life, being a business owner. So, and thank you guys very much. Is there anything else for the committee?
You just vote on moving this forward to the council, or?
We don't vote in committee, we just,
I
I don't, do we need to vote on it?
just to say, move it forward, or?
I would think that.
I mean, I don't think we need a vote, I just asking.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's a consensus here.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So we'll move
I think
forward.
we're ready to bring it forward.
Michael?
Yeah, thank you. Just 2 minutes. Just to update you a little on some of the activities relative to the marina, and we did this with the Economic Development Committee earlier. So one picture is worth 1,000 words, and the ferry service is just being spectacularly successful. We saw an uptick in revenue in the last week based on the Seattle Times article. Anecdotally, I know a number of us have received information from restaurants that their patronage has increased as a result of the ferry service, and that's really cool when you think people have to access the downtown either going up Cliff, or they walk down to the south end, and we have the shuttle there, but still people are exploring Des Moines, which is awesome. So we will bring a report to council in October after the ferry service is completed, but at the moment we're generating slightly over $10,000 a week in revenue, and there's almost complete ridership on almost all the passages. So that's phenomenal news. And then the other thing is that this Tuesday at 5 o'clock, 5 to 7 p.m., the 27th, we're going to hold a community open house on marina redevelopment, and it's more like a check-in It's been a couple of years. We've been stuck with COVID, all of that. We had originally done one in 2017. We did an open house on the Argosy boat. 2019, we did an open house at the Yacht Club. And it's almost unbelievable that it was 3 years ago we did that at the Yacht Club, which it's hard to place COVID because it's like an event happens and there's this huge gap and it seems like the event was recent, but it wasn't. So we thought what we should do is have a check-in with the community. We're gonna have stations of interest relative to marina redevelopment. Gonna ask the mayor to do a presentation, a brief presentation, a brief presentation at 6, and then we'll have our architect, Jeff Koval from Skylab, will follow that up with a little more specificity. Then we'll man the stations, and we've got a few boards for questions that we want to ask the community for their input. But this is more of a check-in, kind of here's where we are, since council's already approved moving forward, but just bring the community up to date, rather than it is kind of one of we'll show a number of boards with the dots that showed what community preference was at the previous workshops and say, we've listened to you, we're building on that, this is how we're addressing some of those. So it should be a pretty good time. I mean, we're excited to do it, a lot of information, and certainly welcome everyone here to come to that. Mr. Chair, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, staff, and thanks McKinsey and Ken for coming. If there's nothing else, any more comments? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.